Having installed some telemetry sensors to the truck, I now want to start looking at the main body, and where better to start than the suspension. The standard shocks and springs are quite effective out of the box, although you'll probably want to refine the setup according to your driving style. I'll be using the truck more for trail runs rather than rock crawling, so I'm after a slightly more softer setup for a more realistic look while driving. So we'll get straight into it and begin by removing the wheels from all four corners of the vehicle. Now you don't necessarily have to do this, although it just makes the vehicle a little easier to work on when it comes to accessing the shocks. Next we can start removing each shock by removing one screw at the top of the unit and another down below. Now bear in mind the screws removed from the bottom are slightly longer than the top screws, since the bottom also hold the linkages in place. Also note that the front set of shocks are using a .45 rate spring, while the rear set are using a slightly harder .54 rate spring, so it's important to keep both sets separate in case we mix them up and run different rate springs in different corners. Nevertheless, with all four shocks now removed, we can remove the bottom cap, which pops off with a little push, and then release the spring itself. Repeat with all four shocks, remembering to keep those pairs of springs separated so that we're left with the shocks themselves. I'll be replacing the oil in all four shock units. The truck comes with a stock 30 weight, but I'll be going with a 20 weight all round, and I'll refine later if need be. The weight you choose will really depend upon your driving style, so some experimentation may be needed. Begin by removing the shock cap, and with the shaft fully extended, remove all oil from within the shock. You can either keep this for future use or dispose as required. This is also a good opportunity to clean your shocks and check your shock shaft, although as this is a new truck it's nothing I need to do right now. Next, with the shaft fully extended, proceed to fill the shock around 2/3 with your chosen oil, and then slowly move the shaft up, down and rotate to either side, keeping the piston under the oil and making sure everything moves freely. We can then proceed to fill the remainder of the shock to the top. Now bear in mind this is an emulsion shock setup, so air is allowed to mix with the oil. The shock cap has no internal bladder and no bleed hole to expel any trapped air. Instead we have flat spots in the threading to allow excess oil to escape as you tighten. Now screw in the cap loosely and carefully move the shaft all the way in. All excess oil should come out through the threading in the cap. Hold the shaft in and tighten the cap to get rid of the remaining excess oil. Now compress the shock a couple of times and ensure you get full movement. There should be very little rebound on an emulsion shock. In other words, when the piston is pushed all the way in, it shouldn't move outwards by itself once it's released. It's essential to have similar reaction in both shocks at one end of the vehicle, so their functioning will be identical on both left and right side. One key tip with the emulsion style shocks is to make sure all four shocks are built with the same amount of shock oil. If each is built differently, the damping will feel softer or harder from shock to shock, so being consistent counts. The benefit of the emulsion style shock is how easy they are to build. If you do overfill, you'll know because it will limit the piston movement, otherwise known as hydrolock, in which case loosen the cap and allow some of the oil to escape. The final step involves adding your choice of springs. For my uses I've decided to go a little softer than the stock springs, so I'm moving the .45 rate springs that were originally on the front to the rear of the truck, and on the front I'm adding .39 rate springs. In effect I've literally dropped one rate on the stock front and rear. Once in place we can reattach the bottom cap, again making sure not to get the front and rear mixed, although fortunately they are marked with colour should they do so. So all that's left is to get these back on the truck, and with the shock in place insert both top and bottom screws previously removed back into place. It's as simple as that. Repeat the process on all four corners of the vehicle, making sure to attach the links while inserting the bottom longer screws. And that's the installation complete. Finally, with the wheels reinstalled, it's a good idea to adjust ride height using the threaded collars on each shock as and how you prefer. Again taking care to keep both front and rear pairs as close to each other as possible. Upgrade complete. Shock oil replaced front and rear, and springs replaced too. This should allow for some better performance during trail runs, and of course I'll tweak oil and spring rates as and when the need arises.